Welcome, everyone. This is Paul Cronin. I am the COO of Successful Transition Planning. I'm glad you could make it today, and for those of you who are listening later on recording, thanks for taking the time to download and listen. So today's talk is about succession planning, why business owners often don't get it right, and how you or your client can. So I know there'll be some business owners on the call today and then others as advisors. So hopefully it'll be useful to everyone. So these are our stories. I'm Paul Cronin, the fellow there on the left, and Jack Beauregard is my partner there on the right. My story is I had a long career in the retail wholesale manufacturing space. We were selling books, toys, and gifts. And I left that business in 2001 to start my first business. We were a data analytics company, and we built a prototype and went to market. And then after we got some feedback from the market, we were trying to figure out how we were going to raise some money. So we decided to go out and put our package and starting to talk to advisors. And then September 2001 came along. And unfortunately, it ended up being a very difficult time to raise money. And ultimately, we failed. So that was my sort of first big professional failure. Did ultimately recover from those bullet holes and move on, and I ended up consulting back to my original industry for a while, but I kept looking for something else, and as we all do, we Google for things. So I decided to Google golf businesses for sale, and came up a business out of Canada, and they were building year-round indoor golf training centers. And I was thinking, okay, this is terrific. I love golf, and I love to do training, and I love to sell. Maybe this is a great combination. So I made my investment, and I learned quickly thereafter that there were a lot of things I ought to have known about the business beforehand. And unfortunately, we had a long struggle. We eventually righted the ship. We were able to really start growing the business, and we had a number of centers opening, and we were going out to raise some capital and so forth. But unfortunately, the CEO and I had a major falling out, and he owned a whole lot more of the company than I did. It was time for me to go. We found a willing buyer to buy out my piece of the business, and I left. And fortunately for me this time, my timing was exquisite because I got my money in June of 2008, right before the financial crash. So the story I like to share of what happened from there is what I call a beach, a bear, and a phone call. And I'm lying on my favorite beach in Cape Cod. I'm having a beer, and sort of enjoying the sunset and the fact that my wire hit my bank account, and I'm feeling awfully good about myself. And unfortunately, at that same moment, my phone buzzed, and I looked and see that it was a voicemail, and I listened to it, and it was from Greg, a friend in the old business. And what Greg said to me was really interesting. He said, Paul, congratulations. I'm really happy for you. Obviously, we're sad that you're leaving us, but, just really have one question for you. What are you going to do next? And I looked at the phone. I said, Greg, you son of a gun, you just killed my buzz. Now here I am feeling so good about having sold and having the money in the account, and now I can figure out what I want to do next. But I really didn't have a plan. It was exactly the right question to ask. So a short time later, I was introduced to a local group of people called the Exit Planning Exchange. They're now starting to build a national network of centers around the country where they bring together different advisors, business owners, what have you, who are all related to the subject of what am I going to do with this business. And I ended up sitting down next to this distinguished looking gentleman, Jack Beauregard. Jack asked me a question. He said, well, Paul, what do you do? Now at the time, I really didn't have a lot going on other than a small consulting contract back to that old retail industry. But that wasn't going to last very long. And I knew I needed to do something else, both for personal and financial reasons. And my line was, well, I help companies grow faster. Is that something you're interested in? Because I'm a sales and marketing guy at heart. And Jack said, well, I might be. And I said, well, Jack, what do you do? And Jack said, well, you know how people get to a certain point in life where maybe they sell their company or they decide to retire and they're not really sure what they're going to do next. And of course, I'm having this out-of-body experience as he's saying that, laughing and silently. And I said, well, yeah, I know what you mean. And he said, well, I have a process that helps fix that. And kind of shaking my head and said, what's the process? Don't you just sort of do it? Don't you just get out there and kind of see what happens? And I said, well, this is interesting. Let's get together for coffee. And so we met for one coffee, and then we met for another coffee. And next thing you know, we ended up having coffee for about a year. Every week or so, we'd get together, and he was telling me what his business was about and the client experiences. And, you know, my other little consulting project was winding down. And I said, okay, this is really interesting. Let's find a way to work together. And what came out of that experience was, you know, this process that he has created is actually replicatable. And what he needed to do was that. So a lot of the work that I've done has been helping Jack from a strategic portion as well as bringing in other consultants of taking his process and breaking it down to a series of programs that people can address this issue from where they are as opposed to sort of the one size fits all. And then to create a methodology to teach advisors, coaches, accountants, lawyers, and so forth how to implement these programs all over the world. And now we have 30 different people in 5 different countries, and we're going to be looking to continue to grow. So Jack's story is interesting. And he was also a sales and marketing guy. In his case, he was in the orthopedics world. And in 1990, he started the first cost containment company, which was essentially saying the same products that all the big labels that Johnson & Johnson and so forth were using actually all come from these same manufacturers in Indiana who own all the patents. So he simply went to them and said, hey, I'll buy these from you, and I'm going to undercut the big boys by 40%. And overnight, practically, he built a business. And in a couple of years, he's in 42 states. He's got all these distributors, and things are going great. But 2 things happen. One is he built an owner-dependent company. He was really the business. And the other part that happened, of which he had no control, is his wife's health was failing. And ultimately, she succumbed to cancer and left him with a 2-year-old. Obviously, that's an extremely devastating process to go through. But when you're going through that as a grieving, now single father, and you have built an owner-dependent company, it was pretty obvious that he wasn't going to be able to continue the business. So he didn't. He left it and moved on. But as part of his big process, he had decided to study. And he studied at the Harvard Divinity School, not to be a theologian and so forth, but really to teach. Not to teach, but to understand what is this process that people go through in these major life transitions? What's going on? And out of that research really came a whole set of processes, but I really like to say it's this really philosophy of how to live one's life with meaning and purpose. And those are our stories. All right, technical difficulty here. Now, this is some research that was done recently by, as you can see there, Matamore report, and it looked at the 3 major generations, the generation boomers, the generation X, and then the millennials. And what was found to be reported from the boomers is there are a couple areas, is the top being boomers at this stage of life, we want to be true to ourselves. We want to spend time with family and standing on what we believe in, feeling safe and secure. We also want to have a sense of purpose. Because many of us are looking at our careers or our businesses and saying, what's next? But we also look at those careers and business and saying, that's what gives me purpose. If I leave my business, if I leave my career, I may leave my sense of purpose. And that's an extremely scary thought. A challenge to us overall is that a lot of business owners talk to various advisors, mergers and acquisition advisors, accountants, business consultants, lawyers, and they're essentially saying, we know what to do. We can help you figure out what to do with your business. Just dive right in. It's kind of like, let's just get into the pool here with us. Trust us. And the problem is, business owners may not be ready. In fact, there's a couple thoughts that they may have. Number one, are the people in the deep end of the pool a bunch of sharks and they're going to eat me alive because I've never sold a company before? I don't really know how to do this. And number two, is that water or is that battery acid? So what we're really suggesting is a different approach, that you ought to be asking, how do I help somebody, or as a business owner, where can I dip my toe in the water? And some of the processes that we have address that. So we hope to share that with you. So here are 4 A's, as we call them, that really prohibit business owners from being ready to successfully transition from their company. Attachment, addiction, aversion, and avoidance. So attachment is often summed up as when someone says, I love my business. The business owner's on the phone call. Maybe that's what you say to yourself sometimes. Maybe you don't say it out loud. Why would I ever leave it? And so when you're faced with the idea of, oh, I'm going to have to leave my business someday, and every business owner does, I've left a couple, I will eventually leave this one too, as much as I enjoy it. It's extremely hard because you're attached to all the elements of the business. Others of us, of course, sometimes get very much tied into our business or career. How often you're at a cocktail party and you ask someone, gee, what do you do? I'm a CPA, I'm a lawyer, I'm a doctor, I'm a business owner. Well, if you think about it, what someone was asking was what you do for a living, and the response was more about who I am as a person. I am, therefore, a CPA, therefore I am. I am a business owner, therefore I am. And that's a real confusion. And it's that, if you will, fusion of identity that is enormously difficult for a lot of business owners, and frankly, a lot of advisors too. Now, of course, a lot of advisors and a lot of business owners get advice saying, well, maybe you should sell it to your kids. And you're thinking about the people who are in their 30s and 40s who may have been in the company for many, many years and had a lot of industry experience. And in your eyes, you're looking at these people and saying, yeah, they look competent. They seem competent, and they should be able to take it over. And of course, the fellow who started the company is sitting there, what? You want me to sell it to my kids? Look at them. There's a cowboy and a princess. You have to let go of those feelings, obviously, but you have to understand the mentality behind it. Then, of course, someone might say, well, you can sell it to your employees. You can do an ESOP or something equivalent. And you're thinking, yes, this is a great idea, competent employees. Meanwhile, the business owner is thinking, what? Sell it to my employees? They'll just steal from me. I'll never get my business. Obviously, these are exaggeration, but the truth is, this is what a lot of people feel. And if you're a business owner, you're not the first person who's felt this way. You're not irrational, all right? But you do need to get over these issues. If you're an advisor, you need to help people deal with these issues. I'm just going to take a quick time out. For people who are just tuning in now, don't worry. All of this is being recorded and it will be sent out tomorrow so you can re-listen to the first 5 or 10 minutes that you may have missed. Sorry for the interruption. Other people get into this place and they have what we call the R&D method, what I call repress and deny. I don't really even want to think about it. See no evil, hear no evil, say no evil. And unfortunately, that can leave incredibly negative outcomes. So, for example, as a business owner who had this sort of mentality, didn't really think about it, was very attached to the business. And he decided that when the business was in a position to be sold and everything was lined up to do this transition, and hence he did not have a plan for his personal future, that the best thing that he could do was find a way to void the sale. And the idea that he came up with was to fire his largest supplier. It essentially couldn't function without this supplier. Well, once he did so, because he was the majority shareholder and he had the complete ability to do so, the business was in a complete turmoil, utter chaos. Vendors are upset, employees are upset. The buyer clearly walked away. The mergers and acquisition advisor have all walked away. So here he was. He wanted to be the superhero. I'll replace my largest supplier, which he eventually did. But 5 and 6 and 7 years later go by, and the business is significantly smaller than it was. And he's damaged all his relationships, and his ability to sell it is greatly diminished. It's very, very unfortunate. Unfortunately, people can also make what I call impulsive decisions. How many of you have heard about, oh, a friend of mine has sold his business. He didn't seem to have any problem. My buddy, we've known each other in the industry a long time. Since he sold his business, a year or so ago, then I ought to be able to sell mine whenever I get around to it. Well, not realizing that, even though you may have been in the same industry, even though you may have started at the same time, you may even have similar businesses in terms of volume. The businesses can be night and day, apples and oranges, because of systems, customer concentration, all the various issues that many of the advisors on the call understand. All right. So your buddy's business is not your business. Sadly, others will say, I promised my wife that if she ever got sick, that I would just leave the business and I would devote myself to her because I've devoted many years of our life together to the business. And sadly, this was a situation told to me by an advisor where the business owner literally found out his wife was going to be very ill. He was going to become her primary caregiver because that's what he had promised to her. And this is, a very honorable thing to do. And the only option that he could come up with, because he had to do it quickly in his opinion, all right, and he had done no planning ahead of time for this contingency, a contingency he in fact had created in his own mind, is he closed the business. He turned the lights out, fired everybody, all right, and just let the accountants and the lawyers deal with it. What a disaster. Sometimes, we all have bad years in business. Sometimes you can have a few in a row. Sometimes you can have a bad year and you're like, I'm never going through that again. And that's it. I'm done. I'm all out. Well, it can be a tragedy for you as a business seller and a great opportunity for a business buyer. And a friend of mine had this happen to him. We were actually going on a golf trip together with a group of other guys. And he gets a call on his way to the airport and says, so-and-so is ready to sell his business. He turned around, went back, and ended up doing the deal. And the guy he was buying it with, or he was actually a kind of a collaborative supplier of his, was such that, he got to a point, had done no planning, he had a health crisis, he had a series of bad years, and it was like, the hell with it, let's get rid of it. And so he did. Ruined my friend's golf vacation, but it worked out to be a great deal because he got the business pennies on the dollar. Then, of course, you've got the my daughter. What I mean by that is people say, well, when I sell my company or when I retire, I'm just going to move to where my daughter is, and she's got young kids, and my wife and I, we're going to help her raise her kids. Wouldn't that be a great thing? We always thought this would be a great idea. Of course, that problems that come up with that is, number one, you may want to have consulted your daughter ahead of time. And number two is grandkids have this terrible problem. They grow up. And when you go visit your grandchildren, you are like grandpa or grandma, the rock star. However, when after you're around all the time, you're not that exciting anymore. You're just grandma. You're just grandpa, and which is very nice. But the other thing is, as they grow up, they don't necessarily need you so much. Oh, and one more thing, that daughter that you felt you needed to help, you might find out that she's actually a pretty competent mom. She's got a lot of options besides leaning on you. And if you're stuck in this situation, this is a true story. You move out there, wherever out there is, cut off all your connections back home because you're in this whole other place, 1,000 miles away. And the one thing you thought was going to take your time doesn't really take up so much time. But now you're stuck. What are you going to do? So I call impulsive decisions the junk food decision making. They're easy, they're fast, they taste good at first, but they can often leave you with a lingering negative aftertaste. So here's the story of George. George is an accountant. As I like to say, George said to us, Paul, been doing taxes for 35 years. Don't know what I'd do each spring season if I wasn't doing taxes. So that's all well and good. In fact, George had been learning how to do business transition, an exit planning program he went through. So he is counseling other business owners about how to exit their companies, and he had done no preparation on his own. Well, that's okay until the day he had a heart attack. Now, he didn't die, which is the good news. The bad news was he hadn't done the preparation. So now he needed to catch up. He needed a plan. So he attended one of our workshops where we really helped him get a little better focus on who he was as a person and what kind of future life he could be, what kind of have. And then he followed that up with some private coaching, and he came out with a plan that finally made sense to him, that he completely owned, where he was going to bring in a person, in this case a younger woman, very smart, well-known in the business, come in as a partner, train her up, taking over the business. And that's exactly what happened. In fact, we ran into one another at a holiday party, and I asked him, gee, George, how's things going? He goes, oh, things are going fantastic. And he said, my favorite part is I walk around the party, and this is a business networking event, is everybody's asking me how I'm doing, but they're not asking me about the business. Because what they want to do now is they go ask Janie. They say, gee, where's Janie? I have a business question. They know, all right, these referral partners, my friends, they get that I'm leaving. Actually, in his case, he's left. And these other connections that I have, I can utilize in a new way for the new career he's launching, as more focused on succession planning as opposed to doing taxes and tax season. Another story I like to share is Susan. Susan was a clinical psychologist who moved from the West Coast to the East Coast, and she reinvented herself as a business coach, and she was doing pretty well. But like many things in life, things changed, and she wasn't enjoying it as much. And then she had knee surgery, and all of a sudden she's like, I don't know if I can keep doing this. I don't know if I still want to do this. But she was frozen because she thought to herself, gee, I started out as a psychologist. Now I'm a business coach. I don't know what else I would do. So she attended one of our workshops, and she opened up a whole milieu of ideas about what she can do with her life. And the fact that she followed that up with private coaching and said what was holding her back was that she knew in her heart that she could make this transition. She just didn't consciously aware of it. And now she looked at her transitions she had gone through. She addressed the fears about that she needed to overcome and counterbalance of what it's like to transition. And then she got in control of the process. And that's exactly what she done. She created a process to leave the practice, have someone take it over. Oops. So there are significant financial risks which are unique to business owners. Many studies have come back and saying business owners typically have between 80 and 90% of their net worth in their business, a completely illiquid asset. All right, they can't just go and sell a portion of it someday. Worse, all right, a number of studies have come back and saying between 70 and 80% of business owners have no succession plans whatsoever. And what I say the worst of all is that they have had absolutely no discussion. Haven't talked to their accountant, haven't talked to their partners, haven't talked to their spouse, nothing, right? See no evil. Well, that's an enormous risk. If 80% of your net worth is an illiquid asset and you haven't made any written formal plans, or even worse, you refuse to even talk about it, all right? You are literally the guy on a tightrope. There's also personal risk. And this isn't to be sexist, the Velcro husband, the Velcro partner. But the idea is it's not uncommon for someone who has run a business for many, many years. They're sort of the CEO of the business, right? Then they come home and there's somebody else running the house, because it's very difficult to run a very successful business and also be in charge of the house. In our generation, the boomers, right, more typically is the guy, is the business owner, and the wife is running the house. Now, she may have her own career, but she's, quote, in charge of the house. Well, all of a sudden, you have a clash of the titans. The CEO of the business comes home, and he's clashing with the CEO of the house. That can add a lot of conflict. Those of us who've gotten married are very familiar with the expression, I'll marry you for better or for worse. Well, guess what? Your spouse didn't marry you for lunch. So a story I like to share is Tip O'Neill was a famous congressman and Speaker of the House in the United States. He retired after 40 years in Congress, and he came home, and the story that was reported in the paper was his wife said to him, I married you for better or worse, Tip. I haven't made you lunch in 40 years. So go get an office. And that's just what he did. More tragically, our generation, the boomers, are seeing increasing rates of addiction and dependency, some of which is related to not having a sense of purpose in one's life as you get older. Now, some of you are looking at MLS and saying, what's this guy, real estate? What's he talking about, multiple listing service? Well, it has absolutely nothing to do with that. MLS stands for Married Living Separately. It's very common for one person in a couple in particular who is older or perhaps is retired before the other. And so one has created or is in the process of creating a retirement life, perhaps even in an entirely different state. And then the other person is completing his or her career. They need to save more, it's going to take longer for them to get out and so forth. And what you end up is they're married, but they're actually living separate lives, which sadly can lead to great divorce. And in some cases, very sadly, when people are losing a sense of purpose in their life, it can succumb to a mental illness and ultimately end up in suicide. I want to explore great divorce a little bit more with this slide. So this is a study that was put together back in 2009. I haven't seen any updated on it yet, but out of Bowling Green State University. And what they found is back in 1990, the 50-plus crowd, today we would call them the boomers, about 10% of all divorces were age 50-plus in 1990. Well, now you fast forward to 2009, when it's a lot of the boomers of the 50-plus age, 25% of all divorces are our age group, which is really shocking because that's a very similar divorce percentage of new marriages for younger people. So you would think longer marriages should last longer, and unfortunately, it's not necessarily the case. Our belief, it's because people are going through the process as they get older, kids grow up, empty nest, et cetera, and people have lost a sense of common outlooks and values. Now, we're not marriage counselors, or at least I'm not, but if you don't have a common outlooks and values, it's very difficult to maintain a marriage successfully. The projection from the researchers was that by 2030, about 30 to 35% of all divorces could be the 50-plus crowd. So unfortunately, it doesn't look like it may be getting better. So what are we to do? The golden years, and many of you are familiar with the expression, of course, that's what retirement, right? It's leisure, it's relaxation, it's golf, it's the rocking chair. Well, if you've been used to running a business or you've had a real high-power career, the idea of, golf, gardening, grandkids, I call them the 3 Gs, that sounds kind of boring. Well, if that's kind of boring and you haven't really thought about any alternative to that, you may think, well, the heck with it. I'm just going to stay here. Or perhaps you've said it to yourself, or some of your clients have said it, or your buddies have said, well, the golden years aren't for me. I'll just die at my desk. And what I ask you to think about when you hear that expression is this. Is dying at your desk the best that you can do with the rest of your life? If you want a picture, here's a picture. What a handsome fellow, huh? Sitting at the table, big tie, nice chair. But really, that's it? This is the only alternative? We respectfully disagree. Now, I said earlier, as you recall, when I talked about why would you need to plan? Don't you just go out there and take a leap? Well, this guy took a leap. I wonder, as he did so, that maybe he would have felt more comfortable if he had a parachute. I sometimes joke when people don't know me and say, gee, what do you do? And I say, I help people pack a parachute. And that's a lot of what transition planning is about. It's helping people figure out what they're going to do as they negotiate, as they transition, as they move, or if in fact they take that leap. Because I'm sure this guy would have greatly preferred a parachute to perhaps his handkerchief. Then, of course, other people leave and they become that guy. What I mean by that is a story to illustrate of my business partner. And he went to, I think it was his 40th college reunion. And he was a fraternity member, so he sat with his other fraternity brothers and their spouses and partners. And everybody was, talking, this is, what I'm doing. A lot of his peers are retired at this point. And this one fellow kept talking about his lawn. What he did in the spring, what he did in the summer, what he did in the fall, what he did over the winter. He just completely dominated the conversation. He was quite literally a bore. And what I'm saying to you is you can substitute, golf or grandkids or gardening or hiking or any other quote unquote obsession that people can take on when they leave, when they sell their company, when they retire, because they haven't thought more fully about it and completely oblivious to the fact that nobody else really cares about their obsession as much as they do. They have become that guy. So what's the path forward? What's an alternative? Well, if you think about retirement, it's really an invention in many ways of the 20th century or the late 19th century, where you have an education, you have this career, and then you enter this sort of golden years, right? You'd relax and you may live 10 years or so, and that's about enough what people needed to save for. Well, then something interesting changed along the way over the course of the century. Modern medicine. Modern medicine has extended the life of people who might not normally have lived that long. And I'll share a story of my mother, who passed away earlier this year at 89.9, 6 weeks shy of her 90th. Now, my mom survived pleurisy, tuberculosis, raising 4 kids, the premature death of her husband. And yet she managed to survive through all of that, the 89.9. Well, I can tell you, yeah, she had quote-unquote good living, but more importantly, she had really good medicine. I think about a dozen a day. And so whether or not that's how you wish to go forward, depending on all the medicine or something else, the truth is we're all going to live longer. I'm 54 years old. I'm in good health. I'm a non-smoker. I was talking to an insurance guy, and I said, well, how long do you think someone like me might live? He said, you should save to have enough money till you're 95. I'm thinking, holy smokes. I have to have enough savings for 40 years if I were to, quote, leave today. Well, I guess I'm going to be working a little longer. A lot of folks feel the same way. But the truth is, if we're going to be living another 10, 20, 30, 40 years, and we have an example of how perhaps our parents may have done it dependent upon medicine, all right? I don't want that. Right? I want something more powerful. And the people we work want something more powerful. And we have telling people about reframing. It's not about the golden years, it's about the platinum years, which can be some of the most exciting, vibrant, interesting time of one's life. So let's talk a little bit more about owners. Why do they fail? Well, here's a few reasons. Some are simply afraid to think about leaving because they connote leaving with mortality. Others, of course, are, they're still stuck in my buddy. It's too early to plan. I'll sell 5 years from now. Selling will be easy. Others fear that the transition process is simply too complicated, and to some degree, we in the advisory world have found a great way to do that. And we aren't necessarily the best at explaining about how to uncomplicate it. But a big one, of course, is they're afraid of an unknown future. I like to say is, if you're asking somebody to take a leap into a black hole, and that's sort of their only choice because they don't know what's going on, they don't know how long it's going to take, they don't know how much it's going to cost, it's very easy for them to simply say, I don't think I'm going to step into a black hole. I'm good where I'm at. I'm just going to stay right here. Now, and then lastly, a lot of advisors simply don't know that there are a whole lot of experienced advisors, a lot of owners rather, don't know experienced advisors who've been through multiple transitions and can help them figure this out. Again, as advisors, we need to kind of look ourselves in the mirror and say, why is that the case? What are we failing to do to educate the greater public about what great business transition planning and what great succession planning really looks like? So as I said earlier, some people look at this and owners may say, if I leave, it's like I'm going to fall into a black hole. Well, what does that lead to? That could lead to owners a decision. They just can't make a choice. What do I do with my business? What are the options out there? They may think they're falling into a void. And if that's the case, and this recently a CPA told me, she goes, I wish I'd known You. She goes, I had a deal 2 weeks ago on the table on a Saturday, and the guy literally freaked out, started yelling at everybody. I don't know what I'm going to do on Monday. This is ridiculous. Why are you forcing me? And everything had to go in a big timeout. Right? She was able to find somebody to help him. But at any rate, a process then was, how do you move forward? Others fear, of course, a loss of power and prestige. And so our goal when we work with people is to help people create this identity outside of where they are. These are some consequences of those who still insist on dying at your desk. The business may die with you, employees may lose their jobs, and community can suffer. And of course, your family can experience significant financial duress. A story I like to share is a fellow who wrote a great book. His name is Tom Deans, and the book is called Every Family's Business. He tells a story of a fellow who he was speaking one time, and a woman came up to him, and she said, I wish my husband had listened to your talk. He died a little while ago, and to be honest with you, he left me with such a mess. Some days I feel like I wish I could bring him back to life just so I could kill him myself. Well, hopefully that isn't how your spouse feels about you. So what's some lessons we can learn? Well, one is an owner who doesn't take time to analyze and compare all their options may not end up making the best decision on what to do and may not get the best value. An owner who doesn't have a well thought out plan for what they're going to do after they're going to leave their company may end up with a new life that they find boring or meaningless or unfulfilling. So you really need to have a new way of thinking. Many of you have probably seen this experiment. People ask the question, is the glass half full or is the glass empty? Well, it's kind of the wrong question. You see, there's nothing wrong with the glass at all. I believe, in fact, it's perfect. It's half full of air and it's half full of wine. See, that's the new thinking, a new sense of balance in one's life, all right? Taking the good with the bad. All right? I'm not going to only think about the optimism about, it's overflowing, the opportunities are fantastic. And I'm not going to allow myself to sink into the depression of, it's almost over. Life is ending. All right? There's actually this great new balance you can create in your life. Now, it's not just us, of course, who've thought about this. I'm going to let you read what's on the screen there, but the story I want to share is about Lee Iacocca. Many of you, of course, are very familiar with his experience, how he turned around Chrysler Corporation and saved it from a near bankruptcy. And that is a fantastic story. But before that, you see, Iacocca was at Ford. In fact, he was a chief leader there. He was responsible for launching the Mustang, which was, and I believe still is, the most successful launch of a new vehicle in American automobile history. And so Ford is actually one of the largest publicly owned family companies in the world. And there was a changeover. So Mr. Ford, who apparently had become a little bit envious or jealous of Iacocca's prominence in the press about how he created this whole Mustang. So he invited Iacocca in one day and said, Lee, you're fired. Well, Iacocca was floored. He couldn't imagine. I introduced the Mustang. Business is fantastic. Why on earth would you fire me? And Mr. Ford said, because I just don't like you. Ooh, what a gut check that was. Wow. Now, fortunately for him, he had such a great reputation, he moved to Chrysler. So this particular quote, I hope you had a chance to read now, actually didn't occur at that time. It was after he had left Chrysler. So even though he had been through this huge, personal anguish, all right, leaving the business, being fired, okay, a big hit to his ego and identity. When he left Chrysler, he still hadn't really thought about what he was going to do next. As he likes to say, is even then the roof caved in on him because he hadn't done enough time thinking about who he really was and what he ought to do with the rest of his life. And he is not alone. Oops. Sorry. So there are 4 sequential steps of it, we believe, in a business succession. First is you need to create a personal transition plan. Next is you need to create a business transition plan. Then you have to implement your transition plan and you need to move on to your new life. Now, it sounds easy, but for those of you who have ever been involved in a business transition, or for that matter, a personal transition, you know it isn't quite so. But at least you understand the steps. One of the things that we do is we work with owners, and we don't just work with owners, we work with lots of professionals and executives as well, is in order for us to help them, we need to understand how they make really high-stakes decisions. So Jack has done his research at Harvard, and he came across some research from the business school there. And what he learned, that there are 5 major styles that we each use in making decisions: prepared, analytical, direct, enthusiastic, and relational. And once you understand how your client makes these high-stakes decisions, because that's what, in fact, you're doing, or as a business owner, once you understand how you make high-stakes decisions, you have an opportunity to counterbalance the upsides and downsides of your decision-making style so that you end up making more robust decisions. And when you make more robust or balanced decisions, you end up like that glass of wine, in a better place, balanced, highs and lows. Oops, my goodness. So we like to say succession planning really ought to be an integrated process. You need 4 areas to think about. You need to make it better, make it matter, make it last, and make it happen. So what do we mean by that? Make it better, in most cases, privately held companies have challenges, issues, holes, if you will. And so you need to analyze what those are. Often you need to bring in an outsider. Perhaps it's a CPA, perhaps it's a legal person, perhaps it's a business consultant, to analyze what are the issues involved about making the business transferable. Because if it can't transfer, you're really not going to get the value you might need from it to live this future life that you'd like to design. You also have to make this whole process matter. Well, clearly that's the stuff that our company does through our programs, the Platinum Years programs. You don't have to use us, but I really encourage everyone on the call, as you're thinking about this, you've got to figure out making this process matter. You're going to make your life matter, or you could end up with sort of a boring, meaningless life. You have to make it last, and what I mean by that is the value you get from the company, either a certain payment that you get or payments over time that you get. Then all of that has to be invested intelligently to meet your personal goals. And lastly, you need to make it happen. And you can do all the planning in the world, you can do all the business improvement in the world, you can do all the personal planning in the world. But if you don't execute on the plans, it kind of doesn't matter. So you have to have the courage to make the choice. I'm going to put in my succession planning place. I'm going to transition it internally or externally. And I'm going to make this positive step forward in my life. And in each area of this, better, matter, last, happen, there are great advisors. If you're a business owner, you need to find them. If you are an advisor, you need to figure out where you fit on this. You need to be able to explain that to a business owner so she or he can say, hey, I get where you fit in my integrated process. Oh, and by the way, I don't know an estate planning attorney. Do you know some good ones that I can talk to? Or, I've had this financial advisor. I met him when I was 40. It's 22 years later. I only see him once a year. He's really good at managing my $500,000 401k. I'm not so sure he's up to managing the $17 million I expect to get from selling my company. You know anyone else? Right? And that's a reality of an integrated succession planning process. From a personal perspective, a lot of people think, well, all I have to do is think about my lifestyle. What am I going to do? Where am I going to live? And those are very important elements. But it's actually only part 1. There are 4 other parts of a 5-part series that you need to think about. You need to think about intellectually, all right, how you're going to integrate. You need to get yourself psychologically to overcome what fears that are out there so you don't end up sabotaging your deal, all right? You have to deal with the highs and lows of the emotions of this whole transition process. In a lot of ways, you have to think about a spiritual process. And we don't preach any particular faith or no faith at all for that matter. It's more about your connection to this greater universe that you're part of. If you're not going to explore these 5 areas of your life now, when are you? So as we get towards the end here, I wanted to share what we call a framework for purposeful living. And the reason we use this framework, or this pie chart that you see before you here, is we want people to visualize what are 10 aspects of one life that I should be thinking about. Now, if you look at these first few here, this is what a lot of people think of what retirement is. I'm going to volunteer. I'm going to donate some of my money or time. I got to keep myself physically healthy. Maybe I'll do something intellectual. I'm going to do some reading or what have you. And then, of course, I want to take time. I want to recreate. That's terrific, all right? But if you don't think about these other 6 areas, you're really shortchanging yourself. Now, as you recall, when in my conversation about how long someone is going to live in this new phase of life, if you're going to be living another 10, 20, 30, 40 years, you hopefully want to try to keep yourself as physically healthy as you can for as long as you can, all right? Because as we get older, very simply, we decay, right? And so the more you can sort of put that off, the better off you are, and both financially and personally. Most of us get an enormous amount of intellectual stimulation from our business or our career. If you're going to leave that, you've got to do something else. And I hate to break it to you, but Sudoku and crosswords ain't going to cut it, all right? You got to do a lot more than that. Many people think of, recreational, the golf, the gardening, what have you, and those are all terrific, right? But I challenge people to think about it differently. What about art or music or dance or poetry? There are a lot of ways to be creative, all right? And a lot of those other ways come up with whole new opportunities for you to live and interact with new people. If you have a spouse or partner, as we said earlier, you want to avoid gray divorce, you better think about what you're going to do with this person. Things that are important to her or him, all right, that you can participate in on a regular basis and get a lot of value from. All of us come from families. Some of us make our families in a lot of ways today. There are all kinds of blended families and people who are actually not actually related to each other, but they treat each other like family. Well, regardless, as we get older in life, we have to depend on other people. That's just the simple truth. And so that's what family can be. It also can create a much richer experience of life when you're having regular activities with whomever you define as your family. We all have to live somewhere. That's what residence is all about. But is it where you live today, or is it someplace else? Is it the kind of building you live in, a house, a condo, or this or that? Should you upsize, should you downsize? These are important questions, and if you happen to be married or have a partner, you better be prepared to talk this out, to plan this out, and ultimately you have to come to some sort of reasonable compromise. Many of us get most of our social connections through work, right? The people we see every day. Well, if you're not going to that same workplace, whether you're an employee or an employer or professional, you're not going to have those same social connections. And everyone will tell you as you're going out the door, yeah, we'll stay in touch. Yeah, we'll have lunch. Well, guess what? It's really hard to do that when you don't see people on a regular basis. I was talking at a local university, and a president of the university was quoted, and she said, sometimes when people retire, and she was talking about the people in the higher ed community, it's kind of like a social death. Pretty powerful statement. Think about that. Leaving, retiring, it's kind of like a social death. And what we're saying is you can either treat it like that, or you can treat it as an opportunity. Yes, these particular connections that I've had for 10, 20, 30, 40 years, they may end. In fact, they may die, other than Facebook, right? You can never escape people. But all kidding aside, you have an opportunity. In fact, you have an obligation to create new social connections. And here's why. Those new social connections will help you fill in many cases, the other pieces of the pie. It's an opportunity to experience spirituality and faith. However, in your current faith tradition, a new faith tradition, no faith tradition, some sense of spirituality. Like, why am I here? So recently I had an opportunity, an honor I should say, to say some words at a memorial service. I was sort of organizing things, the MC if you will. And I'd never done that before. I was a little nervous about it. But people, my cousins, this is my uncle who passed away, they each gave me a reading that was important to them, that was important to them about their father. And I had a few minutes to read this ahead of time, and I got a sense of what I wanted to say. But one of the greatest quotes in there came from the book Cosmos. And from there was that we all come from Stardust, and to Stardust we all return. And that really defines it, doesn't it? That's what this great spirituality is. It can be expressed in faith, being expressed in other ways. But perhaps in this stage of life, we're sort of checking off the boxes of the other things we wanted to do, family, career, the home, the this, to that, what have you. Have you really checked off that box about the spiritual connection you have to everyone else on this little earth? Maybe it's an opportunity to explore that. The last two areas of work, and we define work as income producing and then volunteer philanthropic. I'm going to give a very simple math formula. $1 of income that you earn in, quote, your retirement, all right, is one less dollar you have to take from savings. Pretty simple, right? Now, if you think of from a return on investment standpoint, $25 of savings will generate about $1 of income. That's what a financial advisor told me, and that sounds about right to me. So think of it this way. If you earn $1 in, quote, your retirement years, unquote, that's like saving $25. That's pretty powerful. So I encourage everyone, even people who sell very successful businesses, think about income producing work, because you never really know how long you're going to last. You can't predict the next financial crash. All right? You can't predict if something's going to happen that's going to cost more money than you anticipated. So keep an eye open for some income producing work. I can't define that would be today, but when we go through our process with people, we help them brainstorm there. In fact, we help people brainstorm 10 or 15 or 20 ideas in each of these 10 areas of life. Then to choose 6, and from that 6 to choose 2, and then to do scenario planning within each of those so that they end up with the best, most powerful choice, and that each of those choices is integrated. That's why it's in this form, right? It's not 10 squares, it's 10 pieces of a pie, 10 pieces of a whole. So here's a couple of facts about baby boom business owners. Over the next 5 to 10 years, somewhere between 65 and 75% of all smaller businesses are going to go up for sale. For those of you who are in mergers and acquisitions or accountants, you're probably starting to see this, right? The boomers are at the sort of the outer edge of the boomers, if you will, are in the late 60s to 70. And that's very much a time point where a lot of business owners say, I need to do something. You see other stats there. Ultimately, you are talking about trillions of dollars of personal wealth. The challenge is how much of this will actually ever transfer, right? A huge portion of the 10 trillion, sadly, may simply evaporate for people who don't come up with an idea for a business transition plan, who don't do the proper planning, or they die and they leave it to their family to figure out what to do with the business. In an often case, they end up, it's a liquidation, far, far less than it might have been worth with good planning. So here's a free guide I want to offer. This is for any business owner or any advisor. It's an opportunity for you to just, explore a little bit, get some information, a little bit more about what a transition planning process looks like and what our process looks like. So you can simply go to what'snextforbabyboomers.com. You can also get this on our website, successfultransitionplanning.com. We also have a general consumer website called theplatinumyears.com. So it's available anywhere. The last thought I'd like to leave with you as we get towards the end here is the 3 paths forward. Now, the path to the left, that nice smooth path, represents the golden years. It's well worn. People understand what it's about. You kind of know what you're getting. To me, it's kind of a little boring. Then, of course, you've got the well-worn path, the rutted road to the right. That's dying at your desk, right? You can't think of anything else, so you'll just keep going down that rutted road. But the path I'm encouraging everyone on the call today to think about, and for the advisors to ask their clients to think about, is the middle path. And the middle path is a path to the platinum years, which you can't quite see where it is today. But if you're willing to do the work, you can make that path. And you can make this path forward one of the most exciting, vibrant, dynamic 10, 20, or 30 years of your life, if you choose it. So that's getting towards the end today. I will open up here if there are some questions. I didn't see any, but if anyone has any questions now about our process, I'm happy to try to answer some of those. You can just click in the question box. If you don't have any questions now, but you'd like to talk about it later, feel free to do so. There is a follow-up webinar to this. It's December 9th at 2 p.m. Eastern Time. That's the place to register, and everyone who's on this call today will get an invitation to take a look at that. And that will be done by my business partner, Jack Beauregard. Learn to gain more clients while guiding the boomers to the next stage of life. So this is geared for the business owners for the advisors on the call to learn a little bit more about our process. It's an informational about some of our training programs and what the specific programs are. For the business owners on the call, by all means, please go to our website, download the free guide. There's blogs, there's newsletters, lots of free stuff you can do, videos and whatnot. And we'd be happy to try to help you in some way or connect you to some of the 30 people that we've trained around the world. So I don't see any questions coming up right now. I'll give one more look here just to see if there's anything else coming up. I don't see that. Great. So thank you all for attending today. Once again, if you're an advisor, you're welcome to see us the 9th, which I think is a week from today, at 2 o'clock. Otherwise, have a great day and look for the recording, a follow-up email soon. Bye now.